You've come all the way back from America from your latest book being turned into a film. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. I was in Seattle last week, but in Vancouver mainly. I went to Vancouver to actually visit the film set. And while I was there, I met Jeff Bridges. I met the director, Bodroff. And I got a tour of all the various sets in Vancouver where they're making the film.
Now, how close to the book is it?
There are differences. There is a Spook, there is Tom, there is Mother Malkin. Some of the dialogues there as well. You know, there's reference to the village girls, a reference to pointy shoes, but there are substantial changes in the sense that they've got Mother Malkin brings in help from outside to fight the Spook. So it's got a kind of an international flavour. She brings a witch from a different part of the world to help her.
What's it like having a book turned into a film and being from Southport? Is it something you would ever have thought possible?
10 years ago, I'd never. Only in your fantasy. You think one day it might happen, but I never really thought it would. And then in 2005, I signed the contract. And then you're excited for a while. You think it's going to be a film. And then Tim Burton works on it for a year, then he drops it. Kevin Lehman works on it for a year and he drops it. You know, bit by bit you start to lose the sense of excitement and you start to think, will this ever happen? And finally it has.
Do you think it's poor that we can't film it in the UK?
I think it's a shame, yeah. I think there are various reasons why people film abroad. I think Vancouver's got the studio facilities. It's also probably relatively cheap. There are probably maybe tax breaks for all I know, I don't know. There are certain cities which draw people in to make films. They were going to shoot part of the location work in China at one time, but they decided against that because they now realise that Vancouver's surrounded by forests. So in a couple of hours they can be out in the wilderness. So they'll be shooting stuff amongst big pine trees, which is not Lancashire really. So that's the difference.
How much input to the film are you having?
Very little, because I signed the contract at a very early stage. When, I don't know, just glad to sign the contract basically. So I have no control over the film at all. Though they have talked to me about the film from time to time. And at one time they did come to Lancashire and they did discuss locations in Lancashire. It was being considered at one time. But each director has their own view on what to do. And I just think this is what they decided. There's a set designer called Dante, I can't remember his second name now, he's very famous. I think he won an award for, I think it's an animation called Hugo. And he's got some brilliant sets he's designed, I've seen them on a gigantic scale, but they have an Italian flavour. You can see it's exotic, it's medieval, it's not Lancashire. You know?
Now you have a brand new book, the 10th in the series, isn't it?
This is the 10th, the Spooks Blood, yeah.
Now we've got a couple of copies signed from yourselves. Now I'm sure it's going to go very, very, very quickly, but can you give a bit more insight into the book before it is actually launched? Are you allowed to?
I can a little bit really, yeah. Basically, we're facing vampires for the first time. And it's almost like Romania's come to the county. But it's not Dracula, it is basically based upon some of their folklore. There are entities like Strigoi, Strigoica, Siskoi, the vampire god. I've changed it all. In fact, I got a complaint from one Romanian reader who's a bit of an expert on Romanian mythology, and he said that it wasn't right, this wasn't right, and I pointed out to him that it's the same with anything that I do. Any folk tale, any sort of mythology, whether it's Greek mythology, I always shift it, I always change it to make it fit in with the Spooks world. But another thing that happens with the Spooks Blood is that I'm trying to move the big story along, the big story arc towards the final book. So we start off, before we even get involved with these weird people from Romania, with these vampires, we start off with a visit back to Malkin Tower, where Tom uncovers and finds out how he might start to finally deal with the theme for the final time. So we're moving on the story arc in the first part of the book significantly.
Have you got any more planned?
Another planned after the Spooks Apprentice, after the Spooks series.
Have you got another Spooks 11?
Yeah, this is Spooks 10. Spooks 11 is already written. It's called Slither. And it's told through the voice of a mage. And if you're familiar with the Spooks vestry, the Koblos mages are kind of a myth. They're not really quite sure if they're real or not. But this is a mage who tells a story, and in the middle of the book he encounters Grimalkin. So Grimalkin comes into that book. After that, the one I'm writing, so I've just finished that, just about finished it. It's about to go to the copy editor, so it's more or less done. And it comes out this October. And I'm halfway through writing Alice, which will be number 12. Alice tells her story. She tells a long account of how she began to be a witch, or a trainee witch in the early days, when she first worked with Boney Lizzie. And then the second part of the book is Alice going into the dark. I won't say why, but if you read the Spooks Blood, you'll realise why she might have to go into the dark. And the final one, I'll probably start that in August, September. That will come out in October 2013, and I've not even got a title for it yet. Yeah, it's a Spooks ? And that'll be the final one in the series.
Why didn't you stop at 13?
I don't know really, because possibly I wanted to try some. I don't think you go on forever, you know. I don't want to be accused of padding the series out. I know where it's going roughly, but I've not got the final book in the head shortly yet. I discover the books as I go along. But it wasn't meant. I didn't think the number 13 was significant. It's just how it's worked out. Slither, for example, was going to be a standalone book originally. That was the plan. I think Random House were going to bring out a series of books, each by a different author, each a sort of a horror book. But that fell apart, but I started Slither, and as I wrote it, I suddenly realised it could easily be put into the main storyline. So I thought, why not make it part of the main story arc and make it number whatever, yeah? But there's no significance about being 13. It could have been 9, 10, 13, there could have been a 14th, but I decided to wind it up there. But that may not be the end of my visits to the Wardstone area. If Tom survives, there could well be a book where Tom is the spook. Kids for years have been saying to me, will Tom be the spook? Could he be a spook? And I thought, I'm not sure, but there's a possibility, if he survives the final book, that we could have at least one book where we see Tom in action as a qualified spook. I don't think there'll be a series of 13, another 13 books, but there could be another one.
With your books, one big question that does come to mind, you have some absolutely fantastic wording and names for your characters. Where do you get them from?
I think about it for a long time. I mean, the book I'm writing at the moment, I've just met, in the Alice book, we meet someone who is a sort of a keeper of the witches. She's an ordinary human being without any magical powers, but she makes it possible for the water witches to hide out. She gives them a sort of refuge. And in exchange for that, they protect her. At the moment, she's called X, because I've not got a name yet. I'm looking for a name for her. That's how it quite often happens. I've sometimes written books where it's got X, Y, Z. I'm still using that tools. I found so I could come up with a name. I could come up with a name which seems reasonable, but then when I start to use it, I grow so accustomed to it that I think it's perfect, and I never think to change it. So I tend to wait now and see which is the best name. They can come out of anything. They can come out of mythology. They can be sort of something I might see on a street sign, or it can be anything at all. It just pop into my head. I think, ooh, that's the name.
Do you base it on the character then?
Not necessarily. I mean, I'll give you an example. Slake, S-L-A-K-E, like Slake Me Thirst. Slake is one of the Lamias that are in Malkin Tower. Okay, and so I thought that came into my head. I thought that's sort of she drinks blood. You know, that was an apt name for a Lamia.
Any way of getting the personalities? How do you do that? Is it just looking at people, or?
I don't take people from real life. I mean, I've never done that really. Although they must be in my head to a certain extent. I must grab pieces of people without realising it. I think most of my characterisation comes through dialogue. They start to talk to me. Or they talk to each other, and that's where the character comes from. Bill Arkwright's the best example of that. You know, the spook in the Spook's Mistake. You know, the Tom seconded to Bill, and Bill was going to be a nervous wreck. I thought at first. I thought he was going to be on the edge of breaking after years of fighting the dog. But when Tom went to him and so he started to talk, he was aggressive, a threatening guy, and I suddenly thought, oh, he must have been an ex-soldier. He's got some problem, and he bullies Tom. You know, I never expected that at all. He sort of. The way that he talked, and I thought, what's he going to say next to Tom? It just came into my head, and that made me realise what sort of guy he was. He was not what I thought at all. He emerged himself into the book.
Did he ever play things like D&D and stuff like that?
I mean, sorry, Dawson.
Dungeons and Dragons?
No, I never did. I mean, I think I once played with somebody who was a big fanatic on Dungeons and Dragons, and they showed me a bit of an insight into it. But I've never horror stuff from that really. I've never played it much really. I've not really thought about that.
Have you ever thought about turning your games into save or play?
Yeah, I think they could be turned into games. I was a couple of years ago. We were thinking of doing for my own website a kind of a text game, like the old-fashioned text games, you know, where you actually make a decision and another chunk of text, because they're cheap, you know, another chunk of text comes up. But it's finding time to do it. You understand what I mean? I have tried my hand at writing that kind of game years and years and years ago. Probably about 15 years ago, when I think when they first came out on computer, the possibility without having to program, you know, when they came out, the kind of what are they called? Games developers or games creators?
Programmers.
Yeah, I had a games creator, and I did a little bits like that, and you could generate it so it stood alone. But I never tried to sell them or anything like that. So I was a teacher, and I think once or twice I put them on the school computer network at lunchtime so kids could play or look at them whenever. Really.
Now you brought up being a teacher. I was leading on to that as my last question.
Yeah.
How important do you think reading in school is, and do you think it's being overlooked now, particularly books like yours? Do you think it's going more scientific or?
It's very hard to say. I mean, I do quite a lot of schools, you know, particularly in June and October, and the schools I go to, they quite often the better schools quite often have a great librarian or some English teacher who's really enthused with books. That's what it's all about, really. And when you've got a sort of dynamic librarian who's keen on books, you find that when you get there, the kids have read your book already, read some of the books already. They want to read. There's a queue at lunchtime for you to sign. So I think it's possible. I really can't judge. Maybe some schools don't, but the schools I go to, on the whole, tend to be very, very good. And reading is important to the school.
Thank you, and very good luck, and I hope your film's a great success.
Thank you very much.